Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the state and local planning for energy. So I'm going to refer to it from here on out as SLOPE. That's our shorthand for it. And so today we want to introduce you to our new scenario planner and talk about the different scenario planning capabilities of SLOPE. And so basically learning a little bit more about how this can help state and local governments in their energy and decarbonization planning. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time to learn more about this new tool, and I'm excited to share it with you. All right, next slide. All right, so my name is Shannon Zared. I'll be your moderator for today. I've been with the Department of Energy for about 6 years, supporting them in various capacities. And so I'm new to the SLOPE team, and I'm very excited to share some of our new developments. So for those of you who are interested in learning more, you're going to be seeing a lot more of me. And so during the webinar, you're going to be hearing from quite a diverse group of support teams. So we've got Elizabeth McNamee. She is a fellow here at the Department of Energy in our Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs Office. And her background has been in environmental science and policy, and she is one of our project leads here on SLOPE. We've also got Dr. Katie Richardson. She's the Deputy Director of National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or we call it NREL, their government relations team. And she's one of the project leads for SLOPE as well. And she's formerly managed NREL's partnership with Shell Game Changer Accelerator for clean tech startups, as well as NREL's work in partnership with tribal governments interested in participating in renewable energy markets. And she holds her doctorate in physics. We've also got Megan Day with us. She leads research, analysis, and technical assistance on equitable municipal energy planning and policy at NREL. And Megan has been involved with SLOPE since its inception in 2019. So she's got a wealth of experience with us. And finally, we've got Jeff Brennenberg. He is the Sustainability Coordinator for Sarasota, Florida, and he's going to share his experience using SLOPE. And so I'm really excited to have this team with us. We're going to learn a lot more here, especially about the scenario planner, and I'll continue to help facilitate that discussion. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So before I jump into it, as always, we're going to go through a couple of housekeeping items. So since we have this large audience with us, always important to keep yourselves on mute. I think we've heard a little bit of conversation at the front end. Just be mindful of that as you're coming on and off mute, especially during the QA portion. But we're also going to be using an interactive poll platform. My colleague Jana just put it in the chat with you. So if you go to pollev.com/NREL webinars 303 in your internet browser, that's how you're going to be able to participate in the poll sessions with us. So we're going to be asking you a couple of poll sessions coming up. So while I'm going through this housekeeping item, keep pulling that up on your website so you'll have that on in the background. And so we're also going to ask you, if you feel comfortable, just keep your cameras off. That'll help with the bandwidth and lessen the amount of distractions going on. We are going to be recording this webinar. It will be available and posted publicly on the SLOPE site. And then lastly, we are really interested in having a two-way dialogue with you here. So we highly encourage you to use the chat function as we go through today's webinar. So if you have any questions about the scenario planning capabilities of SLOPE or our new scenario planner functionality, please put that in the chat. We're happy to address that during our Q&A portion. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the agenda. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of introduction on SLOPE. I'll pass it over to Elizabeth, who will go into a little bit more granular detail. Next, Katie and Megan will provide an introduction and an actual demonstration of our new scenario planner. And you'll be able to get a sense of how your individual jurisdiction can utilize that new functionality. Then Jeff will go into how Sarasota use SLOPE and key takeaways from his experience. And finally, we'll open up the floor to Q&A discussion. We'll answer any questions that you had throughout the presentation and any feedback that you have on how we can best help you and support you through your use of SLOPE. And so we're really looking forward to engaging with you through this Q&A poll. And so we're about to turn into those poll questions. So if you haven't already pulled up that website, go ahead and do that now. So for many of you that are not familiar with the platform, it's an easy to use free online platform, the basis of which is to support data-driven state and local energy decarbonization planning. And so it's a collaboration between 9 Department of Energy offices in addition to NREL. And it's designed to support state and local governments and other key energy planning stakeholders in building and transitioning to a 100% clean energy economy. And so the platform itself contains data on energy efficiency, renewable energy, sustainable transportation, and it's designed to be integrated and easy to use with data visualizations for users to explore and better understand the impacts of energy actions, and to assist decision makers in understanding the various cost-effective options to meet their clean energy goals. And so we've got an example on here. This is just an example of one of those data visualizations I'm describing. So what you're seeing is actually from our new scenario planner, and it shows projected CO2 emissions of Wayne County in Michigan. And this is projected through 2050 under a scenario in which the grid is 95% decarbonized, and we've got significant electrification in the buildings and transportation sector. So now what I'm going to do is pass it over to my colleague Elizabeth, and she's going to provide a little bit more granular detail on SLOPE and its current capabilities.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Shannon. And so as you all will hopefully learn over the course of our session, SLOPE is a very wide range of data sets that are housed and incorporated into this one platform. So first I want to share with folks broadly how that is organized, and that's into 2 different tools. So we have the scenario planner tool, the one we'll be focusing primarily on today, and the data viewer tool. And both of these tools have somewhat different functions, but can really be used together to address a wide range of planning questions that you might have. So I'm going to start talking about our newest tool that was released in December, and that's the SLOPE Scenario Planner tool. The Scenario Planner graphically visualizes projected changes in energy consumption, system costs, and CO2 emissions based on various energy scenarios that users are able to select from and combine. And the creation of the Scenario Planner is really pretty groundbreaking, as it allows users to combine multiple scenarios with one another to generate its outputs. And in that, it will visualize scenarios not just at the state, but also at the county level. And shortly, Megan will give you a demo of this tool, so you'll get a much better sense of what the Scenario Planner's capabilities are then. So then we also have the Data Viewer tool that has been live on the platform for much longer. And the Data Viewer displays both interactive maps and charts for a wide range of data sets surrounding energy efficiency data, renewable energy data, sustainable transportation data, and more. And these data sets can be visualized at the state, county, and/or city level, depending on the data set. So Jana, if you could pull up the text boxes on this slide, that would be great. Awesome, thank you. So in a lot of ways, the Scenario Planner can help users identify the projected impacts of specific strategies on things like energy consumption, CO2 emissions, and system costs, while the Data Viewer will allow users to explore specific data sets that can help them with their energy planning within certain categories. So for example, maybe the Scenario Planner will show users that they're going to be able to come close to meeting their GHG emission reduction goals if they decarbonize their grid by 2050. And then from there, users could turn to the Data Viewer and look at technical generation potential and cost for a number of different renewable technologies to be able to see which renewable technologies they might want to focus on implementing to start decarbonizing their grid. Next slide, please. So today we're really going to be focusing on the Scenario Planner, but I would also like to just quickly give folks a sense of what data can be found on SLOPE's Data Viewer tool as well, so that you're aware of what the platform as a whole has to offer. I'm not going to walk through all of it, but as you can see, there's quite a lot. We have, I believe, over 40 data layers on the Data Viewer, so I'll just highlight a couple main categories. First, we have energy consumption and expenditure data for natural gas and electricity. We also have some sustainable transportation data, including vehicle miles traveled, fuel consumption, and vehicle stock for gasoline vehicles, electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and other vehicle types along those lines. We also have energy efficiency potential data for residential, commercial, and industrial sectors. And related to that, we have savings potential data for cost-effective electricity and fuel savings measures. And we currently have this for single-family homes, but coming this spring, we're going to also have that for commercial buildings as well. SLOPE also has data on renewable energy generation potential data, as I mentioned. So you'll see there's a long list of technologies provided here that includes things like solar PV and geothermal heat pumps. SLOPE also has projected electricity costs for 16 generation technologies. And there's even more data sets than that, including commercial building count and area, projected electricity generation mixes, and much more. The last thing I'll highlight on this slide is that we are very excited to share that this spring we plan to incorporate energy and environmental justice data into the data viewer to help communities understand and address historical challenges and inequities in disadvantaged and marginalized communities. Those specific data sets are outlined on this slide, but definitely be on the lookout for those in a couple of months. Next slide, please. Great. So I want to share just a few examples of how states and cities in different regions have used SLOPE to support their planning efforts to date, so that you can get a better sense of how your jurisdiction may be able to leverage the platform. So you can see that Milwaukee is using SLOPE to identify sectors with the biggest impact on reducing energy costs and emissions, and to determine what renewable technologies are most cost effective for them over time. New Mexico, on the other hand, has used SLOPE to determine potential for distributed energy and energy efficiency to meet its consumption needs and assess impacts that vehicle electrification will have on electricity demand. And lastly, Miami, Florida is using SLOPE to inform building efficiency ordinances, renewable energy pilot programs, and its community outreach and education. And now that the scenario planner has been released, there will be even more ways that jurisdictions can leverage SLOPE to support even more planning questions. And we'll hear some great examples of that in our demo in just a little bit. Next slide, please. All right, so you'll see in the box on the right here that we have published 2 of those examples that I just mentioned as case studies, or what we refer to as SLOPE stories. These are found right on SLOPE's website. And our Milwaukee story again describes Milwaukee's use of SLOPE to help inform their climate and equity planning. And this week we just published the New Mexico story that describes their utilization of SLOPE to inform their grid modernization and transportation planning. So I definitely encourage folks to check out both of those. But taking a step back, let's summarize how SLOPE can help your jurisdiction. So we understand that state and local governments typically have aspirational energy and climate goals that have limited time, staff, or access to consultants to comprehensively analyze opportunities and plan for goal achievement. So accordingly, SLOPE has been developed as a free, easy-to-use tool to help jurisdictions quickly see and understand the local, cost-effective options to meet energy and climate goals and identify high-impact areas to help prioritize state and local investments, and to help prioritize decarbonization planning strategies. So with that, I hope that Shannon and I gave folks a good idea of what the SLOPE platform is and the data it currently offers through its data viewer tool. But in just a few minutes, we're going to share with you what this webinar is really all about, our new scenario planner tool that we're very excited about. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Katie Richardson from NREL. Katie's going to give us a bit of background and introduction to SLOPE Scenario Planner, and we're very excited to be able to share this with you so that you can begin to envision how your jurisdiction or organization may be able to leverage SLOPE Scenario Planner to support your energy planning. So with that, I will pass the mic to Katie.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I suspect many of you are attending today because you share our belief that data-driven decision-making can empower communities to invest resources in the most impactful and cost-efficient way. And certainly with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, new resources are now becoming available for states, tribes, and local governments, which makes this an especially important time for communities to be setting clean energy goals and planning how to use resources effectively. So we're super excited about the Scenario Planner and its launch. We think it couldn't be more timely. So what is the Scenario Planner? The Scenario Planner allows users to build, view, and compare energy scenarios through the year 2050. As you gaze into your crystal ball, you might be wondering, what will it mean for my community as the grid is decarbonized, as more drivers choose electric vehicles, as building heating is electrified, and energy loads become more flexible? With the scenario planner, you can explore the implications of these scenarios across planning metrics like energy consumption, carbon dioxide emissions, and differences in system costs. The planner also models how combining strategies can result in trade-offs or synergies. You might also be wondering what pace of technology adoption will be necessary to meet my community's goals. The scenario planner includes, for every scenario, the share of space heating services supplied by electricity, the share of electric light-duty vehicles, and the share of renewable energy on the grid. Communities can use this information to set technology adoption benchmarks aligned with your emissions goals. This groundbreaking capability has been developed on a backbone of transformational scenarios, layered with 5 of NREL's flagship models and with support from multiple DOE technology offices. And most importantly, the planner provides unprecedented data resolution. This means county-level projections are publicly available now to help indicate potential energy strategies for more than 3,000 counties across the US. So with that, I am sure you are eager to see the planner in action. It is now my pleasure to introduce Megan Day, who will soon demonstrate the planner for us. Senior Energy Planner Megan Day is a certified urban and regional planner who leads NREL analysis and technical assistance for state and local entities, always with a keen eye toward energy equity at every step of her work. In one way or another, Megan Day has been working over the entirety of her NREL career, more than 7 years, to develop easy to access, forward-looking scenario data for local energy planners. So I know Megan is very excited to demonstrate the capabilities of the planner with you today. But before we get there, we'd like to frame our demonstration through the lens of an example community, which brings me to the introduction of Jeff Fredenberg. Jeff is a sustainability coordinator for the city of Sarasota, Florida. As part of Florida's Race to Zero campaign and in coordination with the Sierra Club, NREL has been working with Jeff and the city to explore the implications of Sarasota data in SLOPE. Jeff is here to share the city's perspective on why Sarasota is turning to the insights of the scenario planner to set a course to achieve the city's ambitious clean energy goals. Jeff?
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the sneak preview that you've allowed the city of Sarasota to have of SLOPE. I want to do just a little bit of introduction of the city of Sarasota and some background on how we got to the questions that we'll discuss in a little bit, and then we'll get right into the scenario planner and some demonstrations. So Sarasota is a little city in Southwest Florida. We have about 60,000 people here, and in 2003 we started setting some pretty ambitious goals for back then, and we got even more ambitious in 2018, where we adopted the Ready for 100 goals for the city. That would be 100% renewable, zero emission energy sources by 2045 community-wide, and by 2030 for city operations. So, I think cities are really good at setting long-term goals, but then not thinking about all of the individual steps that we need to take to get there. And so when I was talking about this with a friend, she told me about scope. And I said, well, that sounds wonky. I want to know more. And it was pitched to me as, a way to plan for the future, focus on our energy goals, but then also keep our LMI community in mind, which sounded like a really good idea. And so I was blessed with the opportunity to work with Katie and the team to explore this tool. When thinking about the questions that you can ask the tool, I thought about the process that we took to achieve, that we took to get to our Ready for 100 goals. And one great outcome that we had from that process was that we took a look and got with a lot of community members and asked them, what do you think that we can do to achieve these audacious 100% renewable energy goals? And they said, incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into energy planning, and do green trainings, and keep moving forward. And so we took that information really to heart, and as a city started to do a series of equity trainings for our department heads to focus on environmental justice, capacitation, and look at how discriminatory zoning and discriminatory policies have impacted city and community-wide impacts. So with that in mind, and with that as kind of the frame of the way that we wanted to use SLOPE, you can see why having a tool like this to look at emissions and energy data and then relate it to some of our other city goals can be really, really important. And so one caveat is we're just starting this journey. As you'll see, this is a very complete tool. You can look at so many different variables and pull them in and compare them. We've had a few sessions to look at some of the data. And so, starting out, I asked myself a few questions, hoping to get this out of the tool. We know our energy goals. We know we have DEI goals. We know the emissions that we want to reduce, but how can we set incremental goals, whether it's every year or every 5 years, to achieve those goals? And how can we keep equity in mind? And so with those questions in mind, I invite you to listen to Megan for her demo, and then we'll come back at the end of that and I'll talk about how some of this tool was used to answer some questions that I had. So Megan, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Really excited to be here with you and to share the scenario planner with you. So if you guys take down those slides, I will share my screen here and we'll explore. Okay, looks like you're able to see my screen. And I'm starting at the very beginning here. So here we are on the State and Local Planning for Energy, or SLOPE platform. This is the home page. You've got a video that you can see down here on the data
Hey, Megan,
viewer.
sorry to butt in here. I am not able to yet see your screen, and it sounds like others are not as well.
Okay, just have to hit the share button.
There we go. Looks great. Thank you.
Always forget that last part. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, here we are on the homepage for SLOPE. Okay, and so I'm going to just walk through this so you can follow along. If you want to Google SLOPE and DOE or NREL, you can probably pick it up pretty easily and find where we are and follow along for your own community as we go through this process here. So homepage. About has lots of frequently asked questions and more on the data sources and assumptions here. And the data viewer was referenced already. We've got over 20 different data sets on many different energy resources, as local as possible. And here is the scenario planner that we're thrilled to share with you today. And we're going to go through it for Sarasota County, Florida. So Jeff is with the city. The scenario planner is resolved down to the county level, but it does provide some metrics that can help any city within that county understand potential futures, right? All right, so this is the scenario planner. We're going to look up Sarasota County, Florida. And as Katie explained, we've got these 3 energy metrics we can look at. So let's take a look at the reference case consumption. This is the default as the reference case. And what we can see here is that Sarasota, Florida is highly, and this is consumption, right? MMBTUs. And we've got multiple different sectors. Transportation here in blue, dark blue is non-electricity energy consumption. These are fuels for transportation. There's a very little sliver here that's electricity for transportation that you can barely see. And then we have the residential sector, electricity and non-electricity fuel consumption, energy consumption. Commercial sector, fuels and not electricity and non-electricity, and industrial sector. We're here in 2025, which is Sarasota's first goal, right? They have 30% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2025, coming right up, less than 3 years. So maybe we'll take a look at 2025 first and see how might they reach that goal, right? That's CO2 emissions that their goal is, right? So let's switch to this metric. Now we're looking at not consumption, but CO2 emissions, million metric tons. Sarasota, like most communities these days, have the highest emissions in the transportation sector. So, and we can see that actually electricity has increased as a share of emissions versus other fuels. So if they want to if Sarasota wants to reach a 35% reduction in emissions under this business as usual case, there's a lot of work to be done in the transportation sector. Well, let's keep this reference case. And now we're going to play around with some different scenarios, right? So we're going to go up here to comparison view. And we're going to take a second scenario, also for Sarasota, Florida. We'll stick with emissions here, although you can switch the metrics so you can compare emissions to consumption, for example. And let's take a look at, instead of a reference case for the electricity supply, we're going to take a look at 95% grid decarbonization, electricity supply decarbonization by 2035. How does that change our scenario here in Sarasota County, Florida? We can see that in the building sector, that reduces emissions dramatically, right? Electricity emissions have gone down here to fairly negligible. 95% decarbonization does that. There's lower heating fuel use, right, in Florida. So some of you in the Northeast might not see that dramatic of a decrease in emissions in the building sector. But it doesn't change in transportation emissions much, right? Because you're electrifying the grid and you have an electrified transportation. So let's go back and see here. What if we have a high level of electrification? And that means both building end uses, so heating, cooking, as well as transportation electrification. And we can see that this now is lowering those transportation emissions, but we still have some high transportation emissions compared to other sectors. I'm going to drop down here to our planning metrics here and the details of this scenario, right? So here we have 2025, that's the first goal year. And we can see that, for example, transportation has decreased under this scenario slightly, but overall, it's still pretty high compared to other sectors. I'm also going to introduce you to the planning metrics here. So these detailed data here, this is for Sarasota County specifically. And we have planning metrics to help you understand what are the assumptions behind these scenarios, right? These are state level metrics, but they're represented in percentages so that you can apply them to your local communities as they are applicable here. So 2025 is their goal of 35% reduction in greenhouse gas. And so even with these two scenarios, right, we have high electrification and grid decarbonization, we're only seeing about a 17% reduction in carbon emissions under that scenario. Now that's because, and here's some of these planning metrics that can help you understand how to adjust your plans, right, to achieve your goals. The share by 2025 in battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles is only about 10%. 4% under a reference case, business as usual, 10% is the assumption as we transition to high electrification, which hasn't quite occurred yet, right? So that might mean that maybe further electrification or further renewable energy generation as a share of the electricity provided to the county of Sarasota, right? So here we see that still, because we haven't quite achieved those metrics of grid decarbonization by 2035 and 2025, there's still only 6.2% of electricity provided by renewable energy. So maybe that's another opportunity to move up some of that shift to achieve those near-term goals. Let's look at 2045, which is their next goal, right? They have the 100% renewable, zero emissions energy sources by 2045. And let's see, we missed here, 2045. Let's take a look up here. So here we are in 2045. So we can see the transportation has been reduced substantially under this scenario. So we went from 2.3 million metric tons, 2.4 in transportation to 0.9. So that's a pretty big decrease, right? By now, we've got 77% reduction in carbon emissions under this scenario, versus a business as usual case would only be 23%, say. And I think what's interesting is when you have high electrification, you save money on fuels. And so this is a net savings in this scenario of 1.4 billion at the state level, which would obviously transfer down in some disaggregated form to the local level. So you're going to be saving money for your residents and businesses through high electrification in this scenario. Okay, let's take a look at some other scenarios here. You can also add on to this enhanced demand side flexibility, right? This is only available if you have some level of enhanced electrification, right? Because it's basically saying that we are adjusting when we charge or when we use our electricity to heat our homes. We have higher flexibility and when we do that so that it can be better matched to when the sun is shining and you're getting a lot of solar energy generation, or the wind is blowing and you're getting a lot of wind energy. Not as much in Florida, but we are also considering offshore wind if that comes to fruition, right? So here we've got basically the trifecta of what we have so far on the scenario planner, right? We've got early decarbonization of electricity by 2035, widespread electrification, and we're matching that electricity consumption to when the clean energy is most available. So we reduce our need for storage and we make that more cost effective. So here you can see the dramatic reduction that happens then. Now there is a methodology document. A lot of the questions I get are, where do you get these numbers, right? I want to assure you that the scenario planner is built on 7 NREL flagship models and studies, right? Some of which have been in development over 19 years in terms of capacity expansion of different technologies on the grid, how that's interacting across a region, electrification future study, etc. So this is all built on all of those resources and studies, and you can reference all of those in the methodology document that you can find in the About section under methodologies for the scenario planner. So I do encourage you to go there to dig in as deep as you'd like. You can keep going and find all of the studies published on each of those 7 tools and models. So here we have grid decarbonization of 77%, right, by 2045, which is their goal. And they're looking at 100% renewable zero emissions energy sources. Under the scenario, we've got 82%. So they might want to see where that difference is and try to target that. But this is our scenario. So they're pre-planned scenarios that you can obviously change your future, but it shows you the range of possibilities for that future, right? So that you can make more strategic decisions as to where you want to invest in infrastructure, where you want to target your programs and policies such that you can achieve your goals with this understanding in the background. Now, I do want to also point out that we have an exciting new addition coming in April. So very soon we're going to be building in a high building energy efficiency scenario as well. So that will give you a sense of maybe you should target more building efficiency. So this is building envelope, insulation, etc. So it's sort of trying to suss out the non-electrification efficiency measures that you could pursue at the local or state level, and what kinds of cost savings that might create, and how that would compare to other scenarios. So coming very soon, you'll be able to add that into your consideration. So that's also a consideration for equity, right, in your transition. If you really want to be lifting up those communities and households that are most in need, have the highest energy burdens or the highest amount of their annual income that is being spent on electricity and natural gas and their utility bills, that is one way to, of course, target that, is energy efficiency targeted to those households most in need with the highest burdens. Okay, so that also, I want to introduce you to one last little toggle here, and that is transmission constraints. Those of you coming in from the state level will know that building new transmission is highly contentious. And if you are assuming that there will be difficulty in expanding transmission capacity to accommodate new renewables, it's going to impact these scenarios, right? So if we assume lower amounts of transmission construction and expansion, that will definitely impact, right, this scenario. I think we can see it here in these metrics. If we look at, say, the share of electricity provided by renewables, it might be adjusted here slightly. So it's an added layer that you can add on if you anticipate that you will, maybe your community or your state is very difficult to plan new transmission in, and so that might be an assumption that you want to make in your scenario planning. Okay, I'm going to give you, Jeff, a chance to make any requests for me to show anything here and the like. What do you think, Jeff? Anything you think we should highlight?
Great job, Megan. This has been so useful, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But I guess if you could pull up the widespread electrification chart against the reference case again for transportation, because I'd like to talk just a little bit about that, and so that'll help me kind of frame it when I start talking about it, I think. And as a frame of reference, I think I speak for a lot of people that have set energy goals. Transportation is such a nightmare, right? We can control our energy production and increase of renewable energy generation, but having little internal combustion engines going all over, and the the implication that has for either the reduction or not reduction of emissions from those tailpipes is something that is really, really tough. And so when you asked me to present on this, the immediate first thing that came to my mind was looking at transportation, just because so many times people ask, oh, you have these great goals, how are you going to reduce transportation sector emissions? And so as we can see here, it really doesn't look that different, right? And I will point out that this is for, I think this is for the county, not the city. And then down below, some of the data is statewide, I believe. But I think that still gives us a good perspective on, what business is usual compared to widespread electrification, and then the gap still then will need to be made up. And that's really interesting to think about. One thing when I first looked at this, I didn't really get, and I'd love if you could just show people how on the data filter section there, you can actually click on and click off. So just under the chart here,
oh yeah,
you can actually toggle some of the information on or off, or the displays on or off. So you can then just focus, if I was just looking at transportation or just looking at commercial energy, that was really a really good way, I thought, to, change the visualizations as well. And that was useful for me. And then the other thing, I believe there's a way to download the data sets as well, isn't there?
Yes, you can download the scenario that you selected right here. Download button. Thank you, Jeff. Good reminder.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
pretty critical. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff, for teeing that up. So all of this data is downloadable, right? and it will include some of those planning metrics. And he's reminded us to show just how this is interactive, right? You can scroll over and have the data for each year moving through time. And you can also scroll over the different sectors and it will highlight that sector so that you can kind of isolate whatever might be of interest to you moving forward. So I want to do one more comparison here, right? We see the reference case and then we're looking at emissions. And then this is widespread electrification without decarbonization of the grid, right? So we see here the light blue is emissions from electricity used for transportation. So it's somewhat offsetting. So unless you have that decarbonization of the grid concurrent, you're still going to have emissions from that electricity as part of your transportation offset. But what's really interesting here is if we switch from emissions to our planning metric, if we just look at consumption. So here we're just looking at how much energy is consumed. So we're converting kilowatt hours into BTUs on the building side, and fuel consumption into also BTUs. So here we can see that even though we are not decarbonizing the grid, just this electrification of transportation is reducing our consumption because it is more efficient. It is using less energy to have electrified transportation versus internal combustion. So you see this offset in MMBTUs from electricity, but you see an overall decline in the total energy used as that's offsetting internal combustion and fuel consumption. So that's gasoline, diesel, etc. So I think that's super interesting to take into consideration that even if you have no grid decarbonization, you will be reducing emissions and consumption through the efficiency that you gain with transportation electrification. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and we'll talk through some of his findings from this this scenario planner. And I have to stop sharing, which it looks like I already did.
Thank you, Megan. I can still see your screen. Oh, there we go. Well, I appreciate those examples, and I know we planned together to do this, but tease right up into my next part. And I don't think I need to go super far into this. I know we're running a little bit low on time, but just one scenario that I wanted to highlight was this chart that you see on the right side of this slide, consumption in Sarasota County in 2045, which Megan teed up for us, and how the transportation sector is such a large possibility, or the largest possibility for us to reduce our emissions. You see the reference case in orange, the widespread electrification case in green, and that widespread electrification as a change from the reference case goes from 11% plug-in and battery cars to 76%. So not 100%, but 76. And that gives us a 41% decrease in those emissions over the reference case. So what does that tell me? For me, working for the city government, I'm always thinking about how this tool, or how anything that I do, how can that impact policy? How can it help educate our policymakers, our city manager? And how can I take it and put it in a way that they will understand? These are hard questions. How can transportation, and how can we impact transportation, even though it's something that people are deciding in their own lives, right? We're not telling people what cars to go out and buy, but we can provide the infrastructure to make it easier for them to charge their cars or store cars that are electric, with parking lots and charging stations and things like that. So as we look at the questions that I had asked at the onset, how can we set incremental goals related to emissions reduction and consumptions reduction? having a planner like this where I can slide a scale every year and see, you know, the possibility of if we have a high electrification scenario where we end up, then I can go to policymakers and say, hey, if we do what everybody else is doing, we'll get, you know, 20% of the way there or 80% of the way there. And so that allows them to have a more informed decision-making process and helps us achieve these goals faster. And so with that, I think I'll pass it on. One other thing I want to say, though, too, is it does help us plan for electrification in LMI communities, because right now we have very, very few electric vehicle charging stations in some of the poor areas of the city. And so it really helps us able to ask those questions, you know, what can we do to raise the boat for everybody, not just, you know, the downtown corridor. And so keeping that in mind and being able to model these different scenarios, I think will help us set those goals further into the future. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll pass it now to Elizabeth, who's going to go on to the next slides. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for your perspective, Jeff. I think those are some really great examples that both you and Megan shared. And I will just flag along the lines of integrating information from the scenario planner with equity considerations. As I mentioned briefly in my introductory remarks, we are adding 3 new EJ related layers to Slope's data viewer this spring. So folks can definitely keep your eyes out for those. And we also often collaborate with folks in using the LEAD tool, the low income energy affordability data tool. I'm happy to drop that link in the chat in a few minutes as well. But I know we're nearing the end of our call here, so want to get to some folks' questions that were put in the chat. Thanks very much for all your questions. We have a lot of great options to choose from. So just gonna start with some near the beginning and try to knock as many of these out as we can. So the first one was about what are the underlying data sources for the scenario planner? And I did drop the link to the methodology in the chat. But essentially, there are a lot of underlying data sources that feed into the scenario planner, which is part of what makes it such a groundbreaking tool. Some of these sources include NREL's 2021 standard scenarios, also the electrification futures study, annual energy outlook data, DOE's Comstock and ResStock tools. So there's a number of underlying data sets that feed into various functionalities within the scenario planner. So if you're interested in which specific output is linked to which specific data source, I definitely encourage you to check out the chart in the methodology document. Along those lines, another question we got is about data for communities in Alaska, as there's some data missing for certain communities in Alaska and also in Hawaii. And that is unfortunately because there are a few of the underlying data sets for the scenario planner, like the Reed's model, that only represents the coterminous United States. So there will be pieces of data, specifically the planning metrics, missing for a few jurisdictions in those states, unfortunately.
And Elizabeth, can I jump in and just
please,
highlight,
Katie.
you know, where we can, we have provided what we can. So an example of that is there is county level energy consumption data for Alaska and Hawaii across a range of those scenario assumptions. And so the energy consumption data is there, whereas perhaps the emissions is based on Reed scenarios or you know, other models that don't have the emissions information that we need to supply for Alaska and Hawaii counties. So and county equivalent entities. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for adding that additional context, Katie. That's really helpful. All right, another question I have seen is it possible to change the scenario years, like from 2035 to 2030? And I think what someone was asking about is the specific grid decarbonization scenario. So we have a 95% grid decarbonization scenario by 2035 and one for by 2050. And unfortunately, those are the only 2 years for those scenarios at the moment. And that is due to the underlying data source. Those are the two years that they selected. However, as part of the planning metrics under the main chart that Megan demonstrated, you are able to see the share of electricity provided by renewable energy every year from 2020 to 2050. So that can give you a proxy, even though it's just renewable energy and maybe doesn't include things like nuclear, of where you might be on a year-by-year basis. All right, I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let's see. Have one, is there any view into kilowatt projections, both size of load or shape of load? And I would say not directly, no, but that is certainly by using the energy consumption data, hopefully that would be useful for additional calculations and helping estimate what capacity sizes you may be looking at with these scenarios. I'm wondering if any other presenters have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so the planner has this interaction, which is pretty novel, between supply and demand. And so you can convert the MMBTUs into kilowatts, kilowatt hours. And you can look at, if you're looking at just capacity, kilowatts, you can convert that per share of energy, electricity that's supplied by renewable energy. So those might be two areas where you could suss out some data that might be relevant.
Great, thanks, Megan. All right, unfortunately, there were so many great questions. I think we're gonna have to stop there as we are almost at time. But if you have more questions or more comments or feedback, definitely please feel free to email slope@nrel.gov and someone from our team will hopefully get back to you with an answer soon. All right, so I see we got 2:56, so happy to move on. We have a couple of final poll questions. So Jan, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. All right, so this first one, how do you envision using Slope Scenario Planner? If you could check all that apply, that would be great. So we have to inform goal setting, to help develop roadmaps to reach goals, to create strategic energy plans, to inform program or policy design, help prioritizing investments and communicating with decision makers and the public. Great, so great to see some responses coming in. It seems like a lot of folks are interested in goal setting, so that's really great to know, and communications with decision makers and the public. And a big part of Slope is that we tried to make these visuals really customizable and visually appealing so that they're easy to just pop in a presentation to decision makers or to whomever you want to share kind of snapshot data with. So hope that will certainly be helpful in that area. All right, great. Thank you for all these responses. We are currently thinking about how we can best support users in using Slope for all of these needs. So it's great to see which ones are more important. And with that, we'll turn to the next poll. The next question is, which types of technical assistance would be most helpful to support your jurisdiction in utilizing Slope? So we have a number of different options here. I know the text is small on the slide, but it's much larger on the poll. So we're considering a number of different pathways that really can help folks get the most out of this tool for their specific needs and really to help them use Slope as a means for creating energy plans and goals and developing pathways to achieve them. So there's a number of different pathways we're considering here. So really interested in seeing which ones are most interesting to you. So right now it's looking like customizable fact sheets that summarize data at a glance, and 1 or 2 pages might be really useful for folks. So that's definitely great feedback that we can think about in the coming months. All right, I know we are almost at time, so I'm going to just move us along. We have one final question for you, And for this question, your answers will not be displayed on the screen, but we are just wondering for folks that have used Slope and would be willing to share your experience with us or let us know what you used it for, if you could enter your email so we can reach out to you. Or if you are interested in learning about more about Slope for your jurisdiction and would like someone to reach out to you about future opportunities, if you could put your email in, if either of those conditions apply to you, that would be really helpful. All right, so it looks like that final question is still loading. So once that loads, if folks could provide their emails, that would be great. But in the meantime, I see that we are at the hour, so I'm going to turn it over to Shannon to close us out.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of our speakers today. I think this was an incredible demonstration, and hopefully you got to learn a little bit more about how to utilize Slope for your own energy planning needs. We want to encourage you to reach out to us via email. We want to keep this conversation going, and we really appreciate all the feedback and the thoughtful comments that you guys have made today. So again, thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a great week. All right, thank you.